Hello everybody, welcome to episode 11. Today we're going to be finishing off the response aspect of our dialogue system. So at the moment we can talk to this character here and he says something and we have a couple of responses that we can select between. These responses are just dummy responses though that we built into the create event of our oText object. So we also need, first of all, to put in a way to get those responses from the NPC itself. So we need to be able to do that so we can get whatever responses we want from a particular NPC or a signpost or whatever it is we happen to be interacting with, and then actually use that as part of creating the text box. And then we need to make it so that when you actually select one of those options, something can happen. Either we can call another script or we can call more dialogue with more possible responses and so on. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the data in the place that we want it to be. So I'm going to come into our village room and select this dude, go to variables, and you can see where we've already input. Can I zoom in on that? Oh no, apparently zooming in on that just zooms in on the room, doesn't zoom in on the actual thing. I'll just have to zoom in it in the video editing, so I'll zoom in it there. Okay, so you can see we already have entity activate args, and we have the message that we want to show, and the background that we want to show on that text box. What I'm going to do is add a comma, and I'm going to put the responses that we want to be able to give in here. But we don't just want to extend the length of this array forever with like option A, comma, option B, like based on just however many responses we want to give. What's slightly easier for us in order to iterate through the options and put them in the correct place in the text box is to actually put another array inside this array. We can easily do that in the exact same way we defined this array, just with another couple of square brackets as our third argument, okay? And then whatever we put in here will make up that array within the array. So in this array within the array, we're going to give two responses, okay? I'm going to put response A and response B. I suppose I could have come up with something more flavorful, I don't know. This is just what I came up with. So we got hello there, and then you'll have response A and response B. The other thing we need to put in here, in this array on each individual entry, is something to tell our game what to do if that response is selected. Because at the moment we could highlight one of these responses, we would press enter, but there's nothing to tell our game what to do based on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to use numbers. We're going to have numbers, and each number will refer to doing a different thing that will be identified in a script that we will write later. So this number, you can think of it as like a unique identifier for each response, okay? And the one I'm going to have for response A is just going to be the number 1, and I'm going to put it right at the start of that string, so 1 response A, and then put a colon in between the two. You can use any symbol for this, really, anything you want, even if it's something commonly used in the text, because we're going to remove it from the text right away when we process it with our new text box script. But I'm just going to use a colon here. So we write the number at the start, that's the unique identifier of what we want this response to do, then a colon to indicate that's where that number ends, so that we can put, you know, as many digits like on the front of this as we want without worrying about that, because it's just going to look for the first instance of a colon in order to cut it off, and then the response itself. Then obviously we need to do the same thing in response B, and that can be 2 for now, sure. So we've got option 1 and option 2. They will do different things, and those will be unique numbers throughout your game that will tell the game what it needs to do if the player gives that particular response. I say they're unique identifiers, but you could have certain responses do the same thing depending on what they are. Maybe you've got like maybe number 73 or whatever is your shop response, and that always calls like the same shop no matter which NPC you talk to and give that response to. Up to you. But either way, that's what your your value should look like in there now. Do take a moment to make sure you've got this one right. It's very, very easy. Obviously, at this point, you know, for such a small box, putting in all these quotation marks to identify strings and square brackets to identify arrays and commas to separate those values. Just make sure you've got the right numbers everywhere, okay? So the whole thing should be in one set of square brackets. You should have your initial message, your background number, and then another array as your third comma separated value here, containing two comma separated strings, which should be then colon separated between the number and the response itself. Okay, so it's quite a lot to put in one place, so just make sure you've got that down accurately. All right. Okay, so with that data in place, and there's more than one way you could do that, by the way. I'm using this in the room editor because it's easy. You could always, you know, default to loading these from files if that's easier for you to manage and so on. But just for our quick setup here, it's very easy for us to just stick the activate arguments into the variable definitions in the room editor. So that's what we're doing. So now that it's done, before we do anything else, I'm going to go to oText and actually remove this dummy responses thing that we've got set up here, because we are going to define that variable in the new text box script, so we don't need to worry about doing it here in case it gets overwritten by, like, you know, when oText queued becomes a text object, it does run its create event, so we don't want to overwrite anything we defined in new text box with anything in the create event of oText. And then with that done, we'll close these and open up new text box, and we don't need the room editor tabs. I'll just close that down. And so what we're going to do in here, as you can see, or as you just saw rather, in our oQuest NPC, in the variables, we added a third argument to this, and currently we process the first argument, which is our message, and the second argument if argument count is greater than 1, and now we need to process that third argument, which is a little more complicated because it's that fancy array we just defined. So I'm going to press enter here and write if argument count greater than 2. Alright, so we know we have a third argument to the script, so we can begin to work with that argument. What we want to do is trim those markers from the response, so those unique identifiers, that 1 colon and that 2 colon. We want to remove those from the responses and store them in a separate array, because we're going to have an array of responses and we're going to have an array of response scripts. Okay, just very easily, and they'll just match up. Response 0 will call response script 0, response 1 will call response script 2, and so on. So I'm just going to write here as our comment, trim markers from responses. And we're just going to do this with a simple for loop. So I'm going to write for var I equals 0, I less than array length 1D responses, close bracket, semicolon, I plus plus. And then open and close our braces. Occurring to me now, we haven't actually defined responses, that array, yet, because we just removed the dummy responses from oText, so we need to make sure we do that in here. So I'll do it right here. I think this makes a reasonable place to do it. Right, responses equals argument 2. All right, because we know we have that third argument, and it mostly contains what we want to have in responses in the end. It contains an array where each entry contains the string response that we want to give. The only problem with it is that each one of those has those markers at the start that we need to clip off. But it gets us pretty close to what we want, so we'll do that right away. Then the first thing I want to do in this for loop with the first entry in our now responses array is find where that colon is. So var marker position, and this is why it's so important to make sure you have put that colon in each time, because if it can't find it, that's obviously going to be a problem. Marker position equals string pos, now string that's just colon, or substring. As you can see at the bottom here, it wants a substring and a string. The substring that we're looking for inside the string is the colon, and the string that we're looking for it in is responses I. Alright, so we'll take the first entry of the array and then the second entry of the array and so on, and we're going to find the position of this string, which is just that 1 colon, and it'll find the first one counting from the left. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you've got more than one of them. So all this line does is goes into this array, finds whichever entry we're currently on, and it's just going to find the position of the colon in that string, counting from the left, and return that as a number. So counting along from what we have, which is like 1 colon response A, right? It's going to see the 1, then it's going to see the colon, so it's going to return like 2 or something like that, right, for the marker position. So then, now that we know whereabouts the colon is in the string, we can use a couple of other string functions to copy and delete the relevant portions that we need to separate the response that we want to show in the text box and select with what that response should actually do if it is selected. As for the latter, we're going to make another array called response selected. No, sorry, we've already got that. Response selected is which one we have selected. Response script. Response scripts, and open square bracket I is going to equal string copy responses I, starting from the first letter, marker position -1. Okay, so it's going to count from the first letter, and then however many letters in we need to copy out in order to just get that number, because we don't want the colon in there as well, which is why I've done sort of the -1 on the end here. So we just want that number as a string inside response scripts. And then what we can also do is then convert that from a string into a real number by just doing response scripts I equals real response scripts I. Or you could, if you want, you could just wrap this whole thing in a real as well, but I just thought it was easier to break it down for you that way. Okay, so we have that number stored in response scripts, so we know which what we actually want to do if that response is given, and then we just need to trim that number and that colon from the original response, so that what we have left is just what we want to actually show in the text box. So responses I is going to equal string delete responses I, again counting from 1, and the number of letters we're going to delete from the string is going to be marker position. So it works, this function works very similarly to string copy. As you can see, we provided the string we want to operate on, what letter we want to operate from, and how many letters. So in this first one, we just copied the first section of responses and put that into this. What string delete does is it instead returns the string without the area that you've just selected. All right, so from the first letter up to marker position, which is up to where the colon should be, we take that section, we remove it from the string, and whatever's left we put into or back into responses I. And then at the end of this, if argument count is not greater than 2 and we don't actually have any data on this that we need to pass forward, we can just say else responses equals an array with just the first entry being -1 and response scripts being exactly the same. Alright, I suppose you could have just defined those as -1 like up here or whatever, and then you didn't need to do the else. It's up to you, but just make sure you do it one way or the other, because obviously we're not defining them in no text anymore, and it needs to know what to do with those values if we don't define them. Now what I'm actually going to do is, in this for loop, I'm just going to write breakpoint equals 10 as just a dummy line to attach a breakpoint to, so that we can make sure that this is working as we expect it to. The reason I do this in particular here is because I can't always remember off the top of my head how everything works in terms of starting position. So you know how like we're counting up from 0 here in our I, we're going up to array length 1D, maybe that should be 1D -1, I can't remember. Every time, I mean, I scripted this video, so I happen to know that this is all correct, but every time I do this sort of thing, it can be tricky, and it's tricky for lots of people to remember which things start from 1, which things start from 0. Like, for example, when you're dealing with strings and use this index here, you always start from 1, not from 0. which catches a lot of people out. And knowing whether or not to do a -1 on the end or a +1 on the end or leaving it as it is, it's referred to as an off by 1 error, okay, when you get something like this wrong, and it can catch you very, very easily. In this case, it would be fairly obvious because we'd start seeing the wrong things popping up in our text responses. But I don't know, we might have got something wrong whereby we were accidentally including the colon inside response scripts because we weren't copying or deleting correctly, and then that would be really bad. That might be quite subtle. We might not notice it right away, and it could cause problems later on that become harder to track. So it's always worth, like, when you do something like this with a lot of -1s and 1s and 0s, to sort of do a little sanity check, put a breakpoint in, and I'm gonna run in debug mode now. Go and talk to this guy, and that should bring us all the way to our new text box script, and we've called this for the first time. And so what we should see is if I go to oh, this is the instance here actually in variables, instance of text. We go to here, we've got responses, the array. And you can see it's already gone through this once because I put the breakpoint at the end here, and you can see response A is correct. That's the response we wanted. And we've still got to operate on response B because that'll come in the next cycle of our for loop. And if I go to response scripts down here, you can see a 1 has been successfully put into response scripts and doesn't have the colon in. So we've got all of our numbers right here. Now, if I go up to the top and I just do step into function call, it'll loop back to the top, go down to here, get the marker position of the string. We pop down 1, you can see it's got marker position is 2, which we know is correct. It's the second letter is where that colon is. Response scripts equal, we're going to copy now the relevant section into response scripts, so we should see a second array entry pop up after this that says 2. So if I go step into function call, yeah, we get 2, but you'll notice here it's a string 2, quotation marks around it, so we're going to perform that real function on it now. You see it's turned into a regular number 2 down here. Responses I equals string delete. So now we're going to remove this 2 colon from this this entry of this array. And you can see that's happened. So very, very useful sometimes just to stick a breakpoint in when you're operating on a bunch of variables like this, just to make sure you're doing the right thing and you don't have any off by 1 errors. Just go through it line by line, just make sure what you expect to happen is happening each time, and you'll avoid any issues going forwards. Alright, so that script is doing pretty much what we expected to do. In fact, I think if we run the game now, not in debug mode, we can actually see, yeah, hello there, response A and response B, those are the ones we put in. But if we select them, they don't do anything. So that's what we're going to deal with now. Alright, so closing everything we were doing there down, I'm going to make a new script called dialog responses. We should probably make some groups in here at some point and start to organize these scripts. We're getting quite a lot of them. But what this script or function is going to be responsible for is taking those values that we have in the array called response scripts and telling our game what on earth it should do if the player selected that response. Okay. First thing I'm going to put at the top here is just arg response. If you're using a later version of GameMaker, that might not be a thing. I don't know how you define arguments and so on in potential future versions of GameMaker. But for us, that'll just be helpful so that we can write that. When we call this function, it'll show us what we need to put. Actually, while on that point, I'll quickly open up new text box, go to the top of here, and just write arg message, arg background, and arg responses in square brackets so we remember that it's an array. Just might help us in future because we might want to call that a new text box in here. So if I write new text box, open bracket, you can see at the bottom here it comes up message background and in square brackets responses, just to help us remember what we need to put in what order, because otherwise we might forget and we might do message responses background and so on. Alright, so dialog responses, it's only going to take the one argument, just whatever the response script is that we need to select, and I'm just going to write switch argument 0, and yeah, all of the text and dialogue responses in this game are just going to be based off of one big old switch statement. Some of you more experienced with programming might grimace at the sound of that, but I honestly am yet to be convinced that it is not the most flexible, simple, and effective solution for a small to mid-sized project of this kind. Especially for the sake of a tutorial to show you how to get things running. I find it super easy to manage, and I legitimately believe it is a decent way of doing things, and I'm yet to be convinced otherwise. If I were building a very, very large project, maybe I would seek out a better way of doing this, write my own tools to manage responses or manage them with external data, but there's just no need to do that. No need to do that in this particular game, all right? I'm not going to create some sort of third-party tool that creates like flow charts and so on and create like a full-blown like dialogue editor or anything like that. We're just going to have a simple switch statement that tells us what we want to do. It lets us do whatever we want. Lets us either call more text boxes, or lets us create monsters, or run any other script in the game. Okay, super flexible. We can do whatever we want with it. So switch argument 0. All we need to know is what number is being called, and you didn't even have to use numbers as your identifiers. We could have used things like enums and so on, but it could be more complicated in order to process the string and so on. Just numbers is easy, right? So case 0. Break, because we don't actually have anything assigned to 0, but it's good to have just a dummy one there. So if ever you wanted to have a response whereby upon saying this nothing else happens, it just ends the conversation, it ends the conversation, then you can use this. You can just say give response 0 to this. Case 1, which means you gave response A, will tell the player just that. New text box. You gave response A, comma 1, close bracket, semicolon, and then always make sure you end whatever you're doing in the case with a semicolon and put break semicolon at the end of it to make sure we don't carry on. If you don't do that, if I didn't have this here, I went on to do like case 2, you run into situations where it's going to like execute that and then execute the case underneath it and so on and so forth. Make sure it just executes that by making sure you close it off with the break statement. Okay, you can run into all sorts of weird, unpredictable things if you don't include this on the end of each one. If you need more than one line, if you want to do something complicated, you can do that. Just use some curly braces and then do like a break at the end of them, or even inside it or whatever, you know, just make a code block the same way you would with an if statement. But most of the responses we're going to be dealing with in this game are only going to be single line things, but you can do whatever you want. So case 2 means you gave response B, right? So let's do that. New text box, you gave response B. And now let's also give the player room to give another response to that. So any further response? Background again can be 1, and then let's open another square bracket and write 3 yes and 0 no. Yeah, close bracket, semicolon, break, semicolon. So we'll make another text box if people give response B, and have another couple of responses they can give. And they can either give the response yes, which will take us to case 3, which we'll write in a second, or we can give the response no, which will just take us to 0 and just break and won't do anything else, and just end the conversation there. Right. Case 3 can be another new text box script. It's not really a lot of other scripts in our game to really call other examples at the moment, but we'll see plenty of that as we develop the game further. Thanks for your responses. Background 1 again. I suppose I can put background 0 just to show you the change, even though it's just a character delivering this response. Semicolon, break, semicolon. Because remember, you don't have to give responses as well to each new text box thing. We manage that in the script by checking how many arguments were actually given. So if you just want to give a simple text box, you can do that. And then generally, even though we have a case 0 here, just in case, we can do like a default break. And you might even want to do some sort of like show debug message thing in here that like warns you that you got like an unexpected dialogue response in case something was going wrong. I'm just going to believe that I'm brilliant and nothing is going to go wrong, so I'm just going to leave that as break. And that's really all there is to that script for now, and it'll expand as you just add more and more stuff to your game. It might get super huge, and that's the point where it becomes a bit unwieldy if you're just relying on one script resource inside your GameMaker project. It's just got all these different responses, and they all hook into one another, and it becomes sort of harder to track. Like, oh, case 2 goes all the way to like case 74, and so on, and like going back and forth to track things down. That's where it becomes hard to manage. But as I said, to a small to even to like a kind of medium scope project, I reckon it's pretty good. I reckon the benefits honestly outweigh a lot of the downsides of doing this, and it's by far the quickest system I'm aware of to actually set up for this kind of thing. I'm not that involved though. I haven't played around with loads of different systems. I know Friendly Cosmonaut wrote a really cool dialogue and response system. Maybe hers is way better. I don't actually know. I haven't followed that tutorial. I don't know what she does. But this is the system I use, and I don't think anyone's doing a tutorial on this, so screw it, I'm doing it. So this is how you make a giant switch statement-based dialogue system. FYI, I believe they data mined Undertale, and it did a very similar system, so there you go. Proof that you can build a game using this kind of thing. Anyway, that done. Let's pop over to where is it? We need to go to OTEX now. Go to the step event, and we need to actually make it so that when we select a response, that we call that script, right? Call that function. So when we end the message down here, we first of all make sure the text progress is over the message length, so we are actually seeing the full message and seeing our options. We don't want to select it before the box even displays. So assuming that's the case and we're about to destroy this and move on to the next message or whatever, what we can do is say if responses 0 does not equal -1. So we, that would only be the case if we hadn't defined any responses, right? If that's the case, with origin instance, which I believe is something we set up in new text box, yes. So if instance equals other, origin instance equals other.id, or origin instance equal no one, just showing us what objects, be it the NPC or the signpost or whatever else, actually caused the text box to display. It's worth having that instance call the dialogue response script, just in case we need to do anything with that instance, because otherwise by the time we've gone to that, we've kind of forgotten the original instance. Or I suppose you haven't, because in dialogue responses you could always then refer to origin instance because you've got it in here. But I like to do this anyway because it's easy for me to think of it as just in dialogue responses we're running it from the object that is calling that response. And so if we need to do something at that particular instance's position, we can just directly refer to things like X and Y, and those positions will automatically be at the position of whatever instance called it, not the position of the text box. Okay, so that's why I prefer to do that. Up to you, you don't necessarily have to do it that way. Anyway, with origin response, dialogue responses. Not responses, responses. Then the only thing we need to put in here is whatever response it is, and that response is going to come from other dot, because obviously we're doing a with origin instance here, so we need to write other response scripts other dot response selected, because we have a number between 0 and whatever, which is whichever response we have highlighted currently, which is in response selected. And we have response scripts, which is that array of numbers. So we pick whichever one of those we have selected, and we send it off to dialogue responses. Let me just check my square brackets and everything there. Brackets, yep, good. Stick a semicolon on the end of there. Don't know why I'm working on it in the tiny window instead of maximizing it, because I'm clearly being a bit lazy. But that's everything. So I'll save that, run it now. Talk to our NPC. Hello there, response A, response B. Response A, you gave response A. No further questions. Talk to him again. Hello there, response A, response B. Response B, you gave response B. Any further response? Yes, no. We go to no, nothing happens. Response B, yes, Thanks for your responses with a different background color for no reason. And there you have it. That's how you can set up a complex series of dialogue responses and do whatever you want based on them. We'll be exploring lots of new ways to use this system throughout the game, including like changing what text responses people give afterwards so that they kind of remember what's already been said to them and that kind of thing. All actually really easy to do, but we'll cover it as we get to it throughout the series, so don't worry if you have any problems, because there can be a few little gotchas here or there, even though you think you might know how to do it. Don't worry, we will cover it, so don't worry about that. We'll be expanding this a ton and doing lots of different cool things with it. But now we're probably going to take a bit of a break from the dialogue system, because it's basically done, and move back to some other exciting things in the game. So thank you very much for watching this episode. Hope you got a lot out of it, and I'll catch you all next time. Thanks as always to all my awesome Patreon supporters who've been very patient this week, as this episode came out a bit late to them. I decided at the last minute, after having already recorded a bunch of footage, to actually approach this topic a little bit differently than I had originally planned in my pre-production. I managed to condense the amount of code down and the system we're using, simplify it a bit, so that what would have been 2 very long episodes became just this 1 episode. So thank you to them for their patience in allowing me to make the work better for you guys. They're the people who allow me to do this kind of thing and allow me to make those kind of decisions and bring this thing to you in the best way possible. So a particular shout out to the following in no particular order: Bowser the Dog, Zenan May, Robert Churches, Rovan Darlan, Run, Zephyr Flame, Daka Dondigo, Max M, Bertie T, Relentless Rex, Do What Doobie, Travis Womack, T Lesson, Jason, James Siggins, James L. Anderson, Hare, Hyungjin, Rupinder, Rene Dam, Scott Matthews, Leo, Pixel Mush, Tyler Hubble, Maria Celeste Oliveira Frayling, Cabbage Pants, Phil Vertinen, Gilberto Cisneros, Figgy, Kevin Sheaves, Mark Burgess, Zaki, John Harwood, Zach Collett, Goose, Caleb Franklin, and Troy Mera. Thank you all so much, and thank you again for watching, and once again, catch you guys next time.